Now,
Yeah.
when you work with women, and let's start with one of the biggest subjects that everyone likes to talk about, diet. What is your recommended diet? Do you have something strict that you go by, or do you go individualized with women? And what do you see that should be focused on differently when you're talking about a woman's diet versus a man's diet?
Yeah, for sure. I focus relatively individually because I believe firmly that we're all sort of an N of one experiment. We all have different guts. We all have different lab work that could come back. Some of the women I work with don't have lab work they're showing up with, and perhaps they can't even afford it in some cases, right? Healthcare systems are different all over the world. Yeah. So we work within the confines and the budgetary and lab work that we can, but I individualize it as much as humanly possible. I think there are some basic tenets I discuss. What it's really about: healthy eating, clean eating, shopping the periphery of the grocery store, if you will, and getting fresh whole foods as much as possible, the least amount of packaged goods, really understanding how to meal prep for yourself. And then specifically, for women, I think the thing that we need to think about quite often is many women, 90% of the women that show up to me are under eating, especially protein. And the other women that come into the play who are like athletes, may be doing the alpha thing where they're like, I'm ketogenic 100% of the time, all the time, I'm going to crush it. All the things. And let me preface this by saying everyone's going to be able to have some space in the eating lifestyle, I hate the word diet, world that they want to be more involved in. You want to be carnivore. There are cases to be made for all of those things. But I personally cycle paleo and keto. If we're going to give it a name, a label. I'm not always perfectly doing that because I also believe when someone cooks you a big, beautiful meal, or like you go to your friend's house and their grandma's like, hey, Nana has made her sauce and her pasta from scratch and sweat into the recipe. There's another level of joy that comes from sharing that meal, as long as you don't have any allergies to it. And so for women, the two big things that come up is restriction and shame around food. And I want us all to give ourselves some grace. And that doesn't mean let ourselves off the hook and be bratty and say, I'm going to eat this pizza because intuitively it feels good to have 7 slices. But, no offense to pizza, but also how do we manage this? How do we take sovereignty for what we're putting in our bodies? Because how we feed ourselves is how we're going to feel.
Yeah. And a big thing you mentioned there is how, right? You just said it twice right there. How you eat is important because, like you said, I know too many people that lean towards something they heard, whether it's veganism, carnivore, and they eat with a lot of guilt. They eat where they're not truly digesting. They eat it when they're on the run in between stressful situations with the news on in the background. They eat it without truly chewing it and savoring it. Yeah. And that's how, right? I know so many people get fixated on the what do I eat? I'm very specific. I don't eat this. I do eat. And if I do eat that, I feel very guilty. But they don't focus on the how and that quality portion of it as well. It's not all meat is the same, not all meat, not all kale is bad either. It's like, I get it. Kale is BS in a lot of people's minds, but to some, it could be a very good, nourishing meal. So
yeah, I love that you're saying that also. Just as a quick anecdote, I had a client who was like, I will work with you. I'll do everything you say, but I'm never going to give up Cheetos. And Cheetos, let's be clear, not really a health food. No. And so, but people have anchors. And so you need to let them have them sometimes. And we pulled back the Cheeto, rations a bit, and everything else was perfectly on point. And by the end of the program, she said, this was the number one thing in my world. But as I sat down, as I breathed, because your nervous system is connected to eating. If you're doing it well, you're downregulating your nervous system, you're taking a bit of time, you're chewing your food. And I think when you put Cheetos in and you do those things, you start to realize cerebrally or physically, this is tastes a little chemically, or maybe this isn't as satisfying as I thought before, right? And so that's a really nice trajectory to see when people slow down to eat or just find ways to do it that work with their body.